$20,000. That is exactly how much my greedy ex-landlord lost on a random Tuesday afternoon. All because he forgot one simple rule: never burn a bridge with someone who has nothing left to lose. 5 years ago, this toxic guy completely blindsided my wife and me. We were broke, freshly married, and saving every penny for a house. At the very last second, he jacked up our rent by 53% just because he knew we had nowhere else to go. When I begged him for mercy, he looked me dead in the eye and said, "You don't have to like it. You just have to pay it." My heart literally dropped into my stomach. I didn't get mad. I got quiet. Fast forward 5 years, and guess who walks right into my office building lobby, looking to close the biggest real estate deal of his career? He didn't recognize me. He thought he was about to collect a massive payday. He had absolutely no idea I was about to use his exact words to systematically destroy his entire commission. How exactly did I turn his own words into a psychological trap that cost him 20 grand in less than 20 minutes? Let's just say, the final phone call will make your jaw drop. There is a specific kind of quiet that falls over a person the second they realize they have made a catastrophic, irreversible mistake. Not loud, not dramatic, just a quiet. The kind where their eyes go still and something behind them goes dark. I watched that quiet move across a man's face like a slow tide on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon in my office building lobby. I watched it settle into his jaw, into the set of his shoulders, into the particular way he suddenly stopped smiling. And I want you to know I have been waiting almost 5 years for that exact moment. But to understand how we got here, I need to take you back to where this all started. This story, as it was originally shared on Reddit, is told entirely from one person's perspective. My wife and I got married young, in the late 90s, when the whole country felt like it was running on electricity and borrowed optimism. We were both in our early 20s, freshly married, barely starting out, and broke in the way that only feels romantic when you are not old enough to understand what broke actually means. We made a deliberate decision early on. No kids yet. 2 incomes. Absolute discipline. Save everything we could, live off her salary alone, bank mine entirely, and in 1 year walk away with a full 20% down payment on a house that was actually ours. Clean plan. No room for error. We were committed. The timing worked in our favor. I was a newly minted software developer during the dot-com boom, and I had just been recruited to a new city for a new role that paid 3 times my previous salary. At 23 years old, 2 years out of college, I was pulling in $75,000 a year. Add my wife's income and we were sitting comfortably over 6 figures. Renting a 2-bedroom apartment listed at $950 a month that we could have covered out of a single page. Heck. From the outside, we probably looked a little absurd. Young couple, clearly doing well, living like a couple of people who had not quite figured out they no longer had to. The apartment belonged to a man I will call Hank. Hank was a real estate agent by profession and a landlord by investment. The kind of man who showed up to lease signings in a press-collared shirt and used words like perfunctory in regular conversation without any apparent irony. Thin guy, silver-haired, somewhere in his late 50s. He had a careful, measured quality to everything he did, like every sentence had been reviewed before it was spoken and every expression had been approved in advance. He was not unkind, exactly. He was just deliberate. When we toured the apartment, he spent a meaningful amount of time explaining that the garbage disposal was not, under any circumstances, included in the rental agreement. Not covered. Not his problem. He said this at least 3 different ways. I remember thinking, okay, this guy has clearly had some difficult tenants. Understandable. We shook hands, passed the credit check without any trouble, and moved in. Here is where it started. The thing that seemed to genuinely unsettle Hank, and I noticed it from the first minute, was the income I had listed on the rental application. $75,000 for a 23-year-old in 1999. He looked at that number on the page, looked up at me, then looked back at the number. He did not say anything the first time. But by the time we had finished signing the paperwork, I had heard him mutter under his breath at least half a dozen times, "I just cannot believe what software developers are making." Not warm, not impressed, just unsettled. Like my income had committed some kind of personal offense against him. I brushed it off. People get strange about money. We moved in, paid on time every single month, kept the place immaculate, and essentially forgot Hank existed for the better part of a year. And for 11 months, everything was exactly according to plan. We found the house, got our offer accepted, had the full down payment ready. We were doing it. We were genuinely doing the thing we had set out to do a year earlier. The only wrinkle was timing. Our lease expired 2 months before the new house would be ready. So, I called Hank. Reminded him of the conversation we had had when we signed the lease, the one where he had confirmed that month to month would be perfectly fine, and told him we would need just 2 more months. He was pleasant on the phone, completely reasonable. He said he would send over an extension right away. No problem at all. The extension arrived 3 days later. I want you to picture this moment clearly. I am standing in our kitchen, lease extension in hand, and right there on the second page the rent had been raised by $500 a month, from $950 to $1,450, a 53% increase, for 2 months, for the same apartment, from a man who had just told us on the phone that it would be no problem at all. I called him immediately. "Hank, why are you raising the rent over 50%? That is more than my new mortgage is going to be." He was calm in the way that people are calm when they have already decided they simply do not care what you think. "It is what the market supports now," he said. "I would be losing money renting it below that." I pushed back. I tried logic. I tried reason. I tried appealing to the basic decency of a man who had called us reliable and safe. He listened patiently, without any apparent emotion, and then he said something I have never once forgotten in all the years since. "You do not have to like it. You just have to pay it." I stood there with the phone in my hand for a long moment after he hung up. My wife was watching me from the doorway, and I did not feel rage, not the hot, electric kind, anyway. I felt something colder, something quieter. The way there feels right before something big and invisible decides to shift. We tried every other option. Storage units, crashing with friends, anything to get out early. None of it came together. So I swallowed it. I wrote the check for $1,450. Then I wrote another one the following month. Then we moved out, left that apartment cleaner than we had found it. And Hank still docked $300 from our security deposit for things so petty and fabricated they barely qualified as assets. $100 for cleaning in a spotless apartment. Another $200 for wear that did not exist. He squeezed us for every dollar within reach. And when I saw his ad in the paper a few weeks after we moved, the same apartment listed for just $150 above our original rent. Not the $500 he had forced on us, and then saw it drop again a month later before it finally rented. I understood completely what had happened. He had not raised the rent because the market demanded it. He had raised it because he could. Because we were 2 young kids who made too much money for his comfort and had nowhere else to go. He knew it, and I knew it. I carried that for 5 years. Real talk, I am not someone who spends a lot of time chasing things backward. I never have been. There were months, and then years, where I genuinely believed I had filed the whole thing away and moved on. Life was full. The house was everything we had hoped for. We had a baby. My career kept climbing. And Hank slowly faded into the background noise of an unpleasant memory. Just some thin, careful man from a couple of years ago who took a young couple's vulnerability and used it as a transaction. And honestly, that is exactly where it should have stayed. But here is the thing about people who operate the way Hank did. They never consider the geography. They never think about how close the world actually is. How short the distance between their past and their present. How many degrees separate the person they dismiss from the person who has the ear of their next client. They make their move and they walk away clean, because the math has always worked in their favor, until one afternoon when it does not. About 5 years after we moved out, I was at work on a completely ordinary afternoon when I overheard a name I had not thought about in a long time. A senior developer I worked closely with, I will call him Phil, was up at the front reception desk. And I was passing by when I heard him say, "If a guy named Hank stops by, tell him I'll be right out." I stopped walking. The name landed somewhere in my chest like a cold hand pressing flat. There was no way it was the same person. That was my first, entirely rational thought. But something about the ease with which Phil said it made me slow down and turn around. "Phil," I said, keeping my voice completely level. "How do you know that name?" Phil explained that Hank was his real estate agent. He had bought his condo through Hank years earlier. And now he was selling that condo and buying a house, two transactions. And he had planned to use Hank for both. I described Hank, silver-haired, thin, collared shirts. The kind of professional composure that never fully relaxes. Phil nodded without hesitation. "Yeah, that's him. Hey, before we go any further, if this story is landing the way I think it is, a subscribe genuinely means everything to a channel this size. Okay, back to it because it is about to get real interesting. Real fast. Now, stay with me here. I had barely processed what Phil had told me when the front door of the building swung open and Hank walked in, carrying a folder of papers. Dressed exactly the way I remembered, pressed, composed, professional. He had not changed much. Same deliberate posture, same rehearsed warmth. He crossed the lobby, shook Phil's hand, and for a full 30 seconds I just stood quietly nearby, watching. He had not noticed me. He was here on straightforward, lucrative business, one condo sale, one house purchase, two commissions, easy money in a hot market. Hank was about to have an excellent Tuesday. Phil gestured toward me. "Hank, I think you two might have already met." I watched Hank's eyes move through 3 stages in about 4 seconds. First, the polished blankness of a professional meeting a stranger. Then the vague flicker of something almost familiar. Then the specific, crystallizing clarity of a man who has just placed exactly who he is looking at and is quietly running numbers about what that might mean. I kept my voice warm, genuinely warm. "Good to see you again, Hank. My wife and I were your tenants on that street a few years back. The software developer saving for a house, remember? Well, this is where I work." With Phil, he recovered smoothly. He always did, I imagine. We shook hands. He said of course he remembered us, asked how we were doing, everything practiced and pleasant and exactly calibrated. But his eyes had shifted, just slightly, just enough. I did some quick math out loud, casual, conversational, not hostile. "So Phil is selling his condo what? 150 to 200,000? And looking at houses in the 500,000 range. That is 600 to 700,000 in total transactions. An agent taking 3% on both sides, that is somewhere around $20,000 in commission. That is a solid few months of work." I want you to really picture Hank's face in that exact second. The professional warmth did not leave. Hank was far too practiced for that. But something behind his eyes went very still. Like a man who has heard a sound he was not expecting in a room he thought was empty. He deflected cleanly, said it was more complicated than that. Told Phil to return the paperwork as soon as possible, shook hands, nodded at me once, and moved toward the door. I let him get almost all the way there. "It was really good to see you again, Hank." He did not turn around. He pushed through the door. And in the half-second before it closed behind him, just loud enough, just barely loud enough to carry through the glass, "Hey Phil, do not sign anything just yet. I have a story I need to tell you." Phil turned and looked at me like I had just said something in a language he did not speak. "Rocky, what in the hell was that about?" I have been waiting 5 years to answer exactly that question. I told him everything. The rent, the lease extension, the 53% increase on 2 months from a man who had promised us month to month would be completely fine. The security deposit, the fabricated charges, and the line, that specific, perfectly condescending line, "You do not have to like it, you just have to pay it." I delivered it word for word. I did not dramatize. I did not embellish. I just laid it out, from start to finish. clean and organized the way you only can when you have quietly rehearsed a story in your head for 5 years without ever meaning to. Here is the part I still think about sometimes. At any point in that conversation, I could have stopped. I could have said, you know what? It was years ago. It is fine. Phil is a grown adult. Do your thing. And the honest part of me kept asking, what exactly am I doing here? Am I really going to do this? And then I heard Hank's voice again, as clearly as if he were still on the phone. That particular, confident calm. That tone that belonged to someone who had already calculated that you had no real options. You do not have to like it. I thought no. Not because I am still angry. Because some things deserve to be remembered by the right person at the right time. I finished the story. Phil looked at me for a long moment. I totally see him doing exactly that. He said quietly, there is no way I can use him now. Then his eyes lit up with a very specific kind of energy that belongs exclusively to people who genuinely appreciate a well-constructed plan. What do you want me to say when I fire him? We spent about 20 minutes putting it together. Phil had a natural gift for this kind of thing with calm intelligence that understood exactly what a moment called for, and the composure to deliver it without overselling. We picked the specific phrases. We mapped the order they needed to arrive in. I made sure certain words landed in a certain sequence, because the sequence mattered. If you are going to close a door on someone, you close it properly. You close it with their own hand. I did not get to be in the room when it happened. That is the one regret I carry from this entire story. I did not get to see Hank's face on the other end of that call. I had to settle for standing just behind Phil, close enough to hear both sides of the phone, which honestly may have been even better. Phil dialed. Hey Hank, it's Phil. Yeah, about that. I've decided to get some other quotes from other agents. I am not going to sign up with you on this one. Hank pushed back. I could hear the professional recalibration in his voice even through the phone, the smooth, practiced pivot from certainty into negotiation. He had done this 1,000 times. He would offer a reduced commission. He would reframe the value. He had all of it ready. Phil held perfectly still. No, you really should not give a discount. You would be losing money if you did that. Can you imagine hearing those words come back at you? The exact logic used to shut down a young couple with nowhere to go returned now calmly, without heat, like a document being stamped and filed. I felt the cold click of something completing. Hank pushed again, asked if this had anything to do with his former tenant. And I have to give him credit, the man was smart enough to know. Phil said, no, this has nothing to do with Rocky. This is just a decision I have made. There was a pause on the other end. Longer than any professional pause has any reason to be. And in that pause, I felt something I did not entirely anticipate. Not triumph, not the loud, hot kind, anyway. Something quieter. Something that felt more like equilibrium than victory. Like watching a very precise mechanism complete its final turn and come to rest exactly where it was always supposed to. Phil delivered the last line. You do not have to like it, Hank. You just have to accept it. Double quotes clicked. Phil set the phone down and looked over his shoulder at me. Neither of us said anything for a moment. We did not need to. Hank had walked into my building on a Tuesday expecting to collect $20,000 in commission onto easy transactions in a market that practically handed money to agents. He had walked out with nothing. And not just nothing, he had walked out knowing exactly why. He had walked out knowing that the young software developer he had squeezed for every available dollar 5 years earlier had been sitting 3 floors up in that building this entire time. Had been standing in the lobby when he walked in. Had been for sentences away from his commission all afternoon. That precision is the thing I appreciate most when I look back on it. It was not anonymous. It was not some distant, impersonal consequence. Hank knew. He knew the second he recognized my face. He knew when I did the math out loud with a pleasant voice. He knew when he heard my voice carry through the glass door. And he knew for absolute certain when Phil called the next day and handed him his own words back, without malice, without drama, just clean and quiet and final. I have thought about this story a lot in the years since. More than I would have expected, honestly. Mostly because it did not feel the way I thought it would feel. There was no explosion, no confrontation, no moment where I stood in front of him and laid everything out directly. It was quieter than all of that. A chance encounter in a lobby, a few carefully chosen sentences, a phone call I did not even have to make myself. And yet it was exact in a way that I still find genuinely remarkable. Whatever Hank had taken from us, the extra rent, the padded security deposit charges, the particular helplessness of being told to just pay it by someone who knew you had no other choice. All of it came back. Not in the same form. $20,000 in lost commission is a different number than $1,200 in excess rent and fabricated charges. But the math was never really the point. The point was the precision. The point was that his own words were the last thing he heard before the door closed. I do not think about Hank very often anymore. He was not a monster. He was just a man who confused having leverage over someone with having permanent power over them. For 5 years, he was completely right about that. He just had no way of knowing what building I worked in. Some doors closed quietly. His own words locked it shut. And I did not even have to touch the handle.